So what sort of things have happened, that are contraction-like for the world? And there's some big things that have come one after the other. So we've had Brexit recently, not many years ago. That is quite a big geopolitical thing. We might think we're just a little country in the middle of nowhere, an island in the sea, but actually the UK pulling out of the EU, which of course Christadelphians have talked about for over a century in terms of the UK not being part of the EU, is a big item on the world agenda. And it caused destabilization of the EU. There's lots of things happening in the EU that we haven't got time to touch on tonight. There's an impact of that. It's certainly caused enormous political turmoil in this country. We've sort of had more prime ministers in the last 4 or 5 years than you'd normally expect in 10 or 20 years. So, but we lurch from Brexit into COVID, and a worldwide pandemic comes hot on the heels of Brexit, and this has caused financial stress, which we don't really feel that quite right now, but it is there, I promise you. In fact, it was headline news yesterday if you were listening to it, because the governments of the world are now loaded up with trillions of pounds worth of debt. They were in debt before, but now this is on another level, an unprecedented level of debt, and people are starting to get concerned. The world shut down, didn't it, for almost a couple of years? I mean, this is an unprecedented thing in our lifetimes. Then, just at the very point COVID was declared to be over and we can sort of get back to normality, Putin decides to invade Russia. Putin decides to invade Ukraine, and we've got the worst crisis and the worst war since the Second World War happening. And that began, of course, almost 2 years ago, in February 2022. And suddenly what we've got, and it's still full blast war right now. It's not on our news as much because we get bored. But it's there, and they're in trenches. It's like watching something from World War I. And this has had an incredibly destabilizing impact on the world. The order of things seems to have unraveled with this war. It's had enormous impact on geopolitical situations. It's had massive impact even on things like agriculture, because who knew before that Ukraine was the breadbasket of Europe, and in fact one of the major breadbaskets of the entire world, and was feeding and still does try to feed very poor countries like Lebanon, Egypt, rely heavily on grain from Ukraine, all destabilized. And then, while this is still going on, before this contraction is even finished and is still underway, another contraction hits with war between Israel and Hamas, and the great fear that this would widen out even further. If these aren't contractions, I don't know what is. It's heading towards the final push. That is what's coming. In John chapter 16, verse 21, it says, a woman, this is in a slightly modern translation, but a woman giving birth to a child has pain because her time has come. But when her baby is born, she forgets the anguish because of her joy that a child is born into the world. So with you. Now is your time of grief, but I will see you again, says Jesus, and you will rejoice, and no one will take away your joy. One little reference to Jesus' return being exactly like the time that we're going through right now. Here's another one. This is interesting. This is Jeremiah chapter 30, verse 6. Can a man bear children? Then why do I see every strong man with his hands on his stomach, like a woman in labour, every face turned deathly pale? How awful that day will be. No other will be like it. It will be a time of trouble for Jacob, but he will be saved out of it. This chapter and this particular verse, I believe, is talking about a time of trouble for Jacob, a time of trouble for Israel that comes at the very end. And it's all associated with labor pains, but Israel will be saved. That is the time that we're living in now. So I haven't got this in presenter mode, so I haven't got a clue, or I'm trying to remember actually what slides come next. And it could be a video that comes up next to sort of explain a little bit from the world's point of view what I've been talking about, which will be the next slide. Right.
There is no question that we live in historic, unusual times. 2023 added to the list of unprecedented events. See if you remember it all, as tonight we take a look back at the events that defined the year. Conflict has dominated the headlines, including a still unfolding war in the Middle East. Less than 3 months ago, Hamas militants attacked southern Israel in a surprise, multi-pronged, and bloody invasion. Nearly 1,200 Israelis were killed, and another 240 were taken hostage.
Almost 80 people are missing, are kidnapped.
80 people out
80
of a community of 350.
Yes. 24 of them are above the age of 75. 15 of them are kids. Some are even babies.
Israeli retaliation was swift and relentless. An air assault followed weeks later by a ground invasion, beginning in northern Gaza and then marching south.
The scale of destruction here and in so many other villages along Gaza's border with Israel is complete. Every house is gutted.
Gaza's health ministry reports more than 21,000 Palestinians have been killed. Nearly 2 million more have been displaced. A humanitarian crisis igniting demonstrations in cities around the world. War-torn Ukraine got a surprise and historic visit from President Biden. The first time in modern history a president has visited an active conflict zone not under U.S. control. On the verge of its third year of fighting against Russia, Ukraine launched a counteroffensive this summer.
This is right at the epicenter of the counteroffensive, where Ukrainians have pushed the Russians back a little. They're trying to expand their territory. The Russian lines just half a mile, both that way, and you could hear all the firing.
As temperatures dropped, Russia focused its attacks on eastern Ukraine, where both sides used drones and the front line has barely budged. Meanwhile, Russia's neighbor to the east, Finland, joined the NATO alliance. Other parts of the world saw their own share of instability. Haiti remained in.
Okay, well, we'll stop it there. So they're the two big headlines on that news report, exactly the sorts of things that we would be looking at, aren't they, with Bible in hand. So what we're going to do, what I need to do is to move this. I've got the, let me move this out of the way. Bear with me, I'm just going to move that down the bottom there. You can't see what I'm doing here, but I'm moving something out of the way. What I've done, I've gone through the weekly World Watch slides, right? And bearing in mind, in relation to Israel, last year I produced 126 slides just in relation to Israel. There was about the same number for Russia, and so it goes on. So my job over the last week is to say, what do I leave in and what do I leave out? And it's really hard, I promise you, to do that. And as you know, in the World Watch, I get a headline that's straight out of a newspaper or some reputable news organisation. I always make sure something's sourced at least 3 times out there, so I'm not going on conspiracy stuff. I've got the date, I've got where it's from, and anything in black is lifted straight out of that. It's not unedited, right? Totally unedited. Anything in black is unedited out to the report. This is not edited, this is me. Anything in blue is me rambling on, and you either agree or don't agree. And the Bible quote down the bottom is designed to try and link all of this together and say sort of why it's interesting. So believe it or not, this slide here is the last slide from last year. When I was here last year, this was the slide we finished on, pretty much the last but one actually. Netanyahu sworn in as head of Israel's new coalition government. That was in the Times on December the 29th, 2022, right? Benjamin Netanyahu returned to office today as the head of the most hardline government in the country's history, threatening new confrontations with the Palestinians. So that's how the beginning of 2023 sort of began. So what I'm going to do now is rattle through some World Watch slides just to give you a flavour of how things developed, and remarkably how it is that if we were watching, October the 7th would have been of zero surprise. I mean, absolute zero surprise. Have a look at this when you roll through some of these headlines that we saw just last year. So this is March the 28th. Israel's divisions are distracting it from a regional perfect storm. That was in the Financial Times. Preoccupied by judicial restructuring, Israel's policymakers have little bandwidth to deal with the external crises that threaten to create a perfect storm. Several factors are fueling the potential for an explosion, and you can sort of see where it's coming from there, because Israel's went all internal, and we're worrying about, and Netanyahu's trying to push through legalistic changes that were upsetting everybody, and the people were on the streets causing protests, the like of which haven't been seen before. Middle East expert, April the 10th, Iran is planning a multi-front attack on Israel. There it is in bold down the bottom there. Iran is planning to launch a combined attack on Israel in the foreseeable future that will include all the forces at its disposal in the Arab countries. In the Times, May the 4th, Iran assembles allies for rocket attacks on Israel. Iran is trying to forge a defense pact, drawing together militant organizations across the Middle East to coordinate rocket launches against Israel, regional sources say. The organizations include the Lebanese Shia militia Hezbollah and the Palestinian movements Hamas and Islamic Jihad, all of which have been funded by Iran for years and have operated separately. So you can see, even back in May, things are really starting to move forwards here. Then Israel has its 75th birthday on May the 4th last year. And after defeating its old enemies, the nation faces a dangerous new foe. It said in the Jewish Chronicle, Iran and armed groups Hezbollah and Hamas have joined forces to build a new coalition against Israel. Iran and its partners, such as the armed groups Hezbollah in Lebanon and Hamas in Gaza, have joined forces to build a coalition against Israel that replaces the old Arab alliance of Egypt, Syria, Iraq, and Jordan. Then we come to June. Saudi Arabia wants thriving Israel after years of fractured Middle East. So suddenly we get this headline, because remember that Saudi Arabia is the arch enemy of Iran, and Iran is the arch enemy of Saudi Arabia. One is Shia Muslim and one is Sunni Muslim, and they hate each other normally. Since the current conflict, they've sort of tried to make amends. But anyway, we'll get on to that. Saudi Arabia's ambassador to the US has spoken of wanting to see a thriving Israel as part of a unified Middle East, in the latest sign that the kingdom could normalize relations after decades of enmity. So this is quite a big story, and we wonder what's going to happen. July, in Newsweek, Iran ready to help Palestinians win by force over Israel. Iran has asserted that Palestinians could achieve their goals in the decades-long territorial dispute with Israel only through the use of force. Abbas, so this is Mahmoud Abbas, he runs the Palestinian Authority on the West Bank. He, in this headline, has vowed to liberate all of Palestine, including Jerusalem. Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas has said that we will liberate this entire country with Jerusalem as its capital. He said, talking to hundreds of supporters of his Fatah movement at the entrance to the refugee camp adjacent to the city, we will remain in our country, we will not leave it until God bequeaths us, the land and those on it, until they leave our land, he added, seemingly to refer to any and all Israelis. In July, Hezbollah gearing up for a showdown with Israel. In a series of strategic political and military moves, Hezbollah is intensifying preparations for an imminent confrontation with Israel. As tensions escalate, Lebanon has backed Hezbollah's claims, rejecting any negotiations with Israel over the border. You see how this is building up? Now we're into July the 22nd, Islamic Jihad, terrorist group, similar to Hamas, similar to Hezbollah, based mainly in the Gaza area. We must use crisis in Israel for war against it. Palestinian Arab groups to unite in a war against Israel. A historic opportunity, they said, which it must utilize for fighting and the conflict for the sake of the Palestinian problem. We're facing an historic moment in which we need to unite behind this path. That was in Israel's national news on July the 22nd. A month later, well, in September the 22nd, Netanyahu tells the UN that Israel is at the cusp of an historic agreement with Saudi Arabia. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu told the UN General Assembly on Friday that Israel is at the cusp of an historic breakthrough leading to a peace agreement with Saudi Arabia. I believe, this is Netanyahu talking, I believe that we're on the cusp of an even more dramatic breakthrough, an historic peace between Israel and Saudi Arabia, Netanyahu said. Peace between Israel and Saudi Arabia will truly create a new Middle East. Then October the 7th happens. At the time that I put this in, obviously I do this on a Saturday, every Saturday, this is going in, and this was just happening as I was typing it in. So I had no real idea of the scale of the calamity that had hit Israel at this point. But even with what we knew, it looked like a major attack on Israel. Netanyahu says Israel is at war after Hamas launches a multi-front assault. Benjamin Netanyahu said on Saturday that Israel was at war after Hamas launched its biggest attack on the country in years. It ended up, of course, with 1,200 Israelis being killed, massacred in the most horrendous things. If you've read any reports on it, I don't advise it. It's absolutely beyond belief what these people did. And it was the worst killing of Jews since the Holocaust on a single day. That's how bad this was. Off the scale. I think actually even Hamas, the leaders in Hamas thought they've probably gone too far. They didn't realise that they were going to have free reign for so long. When they went through, they thought they would be fought back, and they weren't. So they just played havoc and killed so many people. And of course, we know, took over 200 people hostage. Hamas slaughtered babies and children in kibbutz massacre. Hamas killed babies, children in a massacre discovered by Israeli soldiers on Tuesday. Joe Biden was talking, well, everybody's been talking about it. You see the babies, the mothers, the fathers in their bedrooms, in their protection rooms. I mean, imagine having to live somewhere where you have to have a protection room with bars and locks, and that's where you go if there's trouble, and they broke through it. Hamas broke straight through them. And the terrorists killed them. This was not a war. It was not a battle. It's a massacre. Then we get, of course, the nations getting very concerned about this situation and how suddenly this could ignite into something far greater. So the US and UK, this is in the Guardian newspaper, to send Navy ships and spy planes to support Israel. Britain will send surveillance aircraft, 2 Royal Navy support ships and about 100 Royal Marines to the Eastern Med. Within hours of the horrific attack by Hamas, the US began moving warships and aircraft to the region to be ready to provide Israel with whatever it needed to respond. This is Time magazine, October the 11th. Israeli leaders say, now is the time for war, and vow to wipe Hamas off the face of the earth. And this has come out not just from what you might consider to be, let's say, right-wing Israeli politicians. It's across the board. Everybody is united in Israel pretty much to say this is it. Hamas has got to cease functioning and they have to be destroyed. Hamas and Hezbollah leaders meet to plan a path to real victory in Gaza. This was in the Daily Telegraph on October the 25th. Hamas and Hezbollah leaders have met to discuss a path to real victory in Gaza and the Palestinian territories, All three groups, Hamas, Hezbollah, and Islamic Jihad, are backed by Iran. November the 10th, Lebanon is on the verge of war with Israel as Hezbollah warns a billion Arabs are ready to support Gaza. Newsweek, December the 20th, Israel's multi-front conflicts threaten regional escalation. Israel's grinding war on Gaza has become a multi-front conflict as relatively low-intensity face-offs with Iranian-aligned forces in Lebanon, Syria, Iraq and Yemen all threaten to ignite a regional conflagration. We can no longer accept Hezbollah's elite force sitting on our border, an Israeli politician said. So basically what you imagine, in the north you've got Hezbollah, you've got Hamas sort of right in amongst you really in Gaza. They've thought to themselves, we've got to rid ourselves of Hamas. That's got to happen, whatever it takes. But if we do that, we're left with Hezbollah, who are even more powerful and can do exactly the same. So we've got to sort this out as well. That is exactly what Israel is telling Anthony Blinken and others from America who've flown in numerous times to try and stop this war spreading. And of course, it's had impact around the world. Anti-Semitic hate crimes soar since the start of Hamas war. The British Transport Police recorded an almost 1,000% increase in anti-Semitic offences in the month after October the 7th, Freedom of Information Act has revealed. And this is not just in this country. It's around the world. Jews are suddenly being persecuted. They were before, but it's rocketed up. And it's the same in America. It's the same in Germany. It's the same in most European countries. So, there we go. It wasn't a surprise. Okay, we didn't wake up thinking October the 7th was the day. And by the way, of course, October the 7th was pretty much almost to the day, the exact anniversary of the Yom Kippur War of 1973. Right? And then suddenly 50 years later, it's happening again. It also, 7th of October, was the last day of the Feast of Tabernacles. All super significant time periods and dates, but that's another story. So why is it that for the last decade I've been talking about the fact that we, I believe, will see an initial inner ring war around Israel involving Israel's immediate neighbours? And one of the passages, and only one of them, is Psalm 83. So, I don't know if you want to have a look in Psalm 83. If you see it in your own Bible, it might be a nice idea. Let's see what it says. I know the words on the screen, but there's a few little bits I want to point out to you in this psalm. This psalm, by the way, is written by a prophet. It's written by Asaph. And if you look up about Asaph, he was a seer, and a seer is a prophet. So it's written by a prophet. And Psalm 83, I can categorically tell you, has not yet been fulfilled, and I'll tell you why that's the case in just a minute. But here we go. Look, verse 2 says, "See how your enemies growl." This is in a slightly modern version, NIV, I think. "How your foes rear their heads. With cunning they conspire against your people. They plot against those you cherish." Verse 4, "Come," they say, "let us destroy them as a nation, so that Israel's name is remembered no more. With one mind they plot together and they form an alliance against you." Now, does any of those, what I've just read there, does that ring any bells with any of those headlines I've just given you? A group of people saying, let's get together. Now is the time to destroy Israel. It's exactly what it's saying there. But the question is, who's saying it? And the answer to that question is in verse 6, 7, and 8. "The tents of Edom, the Ishmaelites, of Moab and the Hagrites, Biblios," it says there, Ammon and Amalek, Philistia and the people of Tyre, AV will say the inhabitants of Tyre, even Assyria, the AV says Asher, but it means Assyria, even Assyria has joined them to reinforce Lot's descendants. So there's all these people that are gathered together around Israel who want to destroy Israel. And they're conspiring and they're forming an alliance to do that. Now, I mean, you go and do this, right? You don't have to rely on me to do this. You can go and find this out. Go and find out where all those places are. And if you find that they're much different to what I've put on the map here, then definitely email me, right? But all the research that I've done into this, and others have, I know as well, it looks like that. That's where they all are. And isn't it amazing that all of them are bordering Israel and surrounding Israel and almost in amongst Israel? Evil is up in North Lebanon, and there is Tyre, both of them mentioned in what we just talked about. In fact, it says the inhabitants of Tyre. Oh, by the way, guess where Hezbollah's main base is? In the region of Tyre. Guess where its northern base is? It's in the region of Gebal. Assyria is almost certain, it's got to be something to do with Syria, if not even wider and further beyond that. Syria is Israel's sworn enemy and is the only nation mentioned in that list. In fact, if you look at it, look, in verse 8 it says, Asher or Assyria also is joined with them. You notice how it's sort of said separately? It's there, but it's different to the others. The reason is that Assyria is the only nation mentioned in all that list. All the others are tribes. Not Assyria, that's a nation. So, by the way, there's Philistia. Philistia, where in the sort of area where Goliath came from, is all around the area that we now know as the Gaza Strip. So there's Philistia. You notice it says, it is interesting, it says about the tabernacles of Edom. This is the tents of Edom. And the largest Palestinian refugee camp outside this area here is in Jordan, with 2.2 million Palestinians living in tents still since 1948, living in Jordan. And what does it say? The tabernacles of Edom. It's a direct reference to the Palestinian refugees who are also up in arms in Jordan because their brothers over here are being killed. And then you've got Ishmaelites who are a wandering tribe, Hagarenes are a wandering tribe, and Amalek. It's hard to pinpoint these guys because they were nomadic. They wandered around. But certainly when you read everything about them, they were in amongst Israel and causing them thorns in their side all the way through. And this, brothers and sisters, is the inner ring war. And it comes before Russia comes down. It's what I've been saying for a long time, and now could be we're on the brink of all of this.
And Hamas continues.
I forgot, right? I told you I wouldn't know what's coming up next. Have a little listen to this. This is about Hezbollah, I think.
And Hamas continue their fighting on other fronts. But the ultimate question that has been on everyone's mind ever since Hamas first launched their attack on October 7th is, what will Iran's queen on the board end up doing? Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, immediately across the border from Israel's north. You see, Hezbollah is revolutionary Iran's greatest ever success story. It was painstakingly created by the Ayatollah Khamenei and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps during the 1980s out of Lebanon's own significant Shia Muslim population centers in the south and the east of the country, representing the first other country that Iran successfully exported their Shiite Islamic revolution into. Ever since, Hezbollah has been dedicated to driving out all American and European influence in Lebanon, defending Lebanon's Shia Muslim community, spreading Iran's Islamic revolution elsewhere in the world, and assisting Iran with destroying the state of Israel from existence. Since its founding, Hezbollah has grown into what is almost certainly the most influential and well-armed non-state actor anywhere in the world today, and is probably more influential and well-armed than many actual countries are. Their leader, Hassan Nasrallah, boasted in 2021 that the organization had 100,000 fighters at their disposal, while Western estimates believe they have at least 60,000, which is still roughly as large as the entire standing army of Lebanon itself, the country where they are based. And moreover, Hezbollah's fighters are probably better trained, more experienced, better funded, and better equipped than the Lebanese army is as well, which likely means that Hezbollah is more powerful than the Lebanese state itself is. As of 2018.
Interesting, isn't it? And this is the power that's at the north of Israel, and it's there in Psalm 83, and they are there as the inhabitants of Tyre and Gebal. Now, here's the fate of these enemies. Because Psalm 83 goes on and says, if you have a look at it in verse 9, do unto them as you did to, I'll read it out in my Bible, do unto them as unto the Midianites, as to Sisera, as to Jabin at the brook of Kison, which perished at Endor. They became as dung for the earth, make their nobles like Oreb, like Zeb, yea, make their princes like Zebah and Zalmunna. Now do me a favour, go and have a look at this at some point and find out where these 6 people all crop up. And they all crop up between Judges chapter 4 and Judges chapter 6. That's these guys. So Sisera, Jabin, Oreb, Zeb and Zalmunna, all between Judges 4 and 6. And guess what happens to all of them? Do you think they live a long and happy and merry life? No. Do you think they all die terrible deaths? Yes. Famous one of all, Sisera. Jael gets a tent peg and hammers it through his head into the ground. Then, as if that wasn't just quite enough, chops his head off. I mean, this is total and utter, complete annihilation of a human being, isn't it? Tent peg through the temples, into the ground, hammered through, and then I'm going to chop your head off. That's what she did. This is the fate. See, when people say to me, some do, well, Psalm 83 could have all been fulfilled. Maybe it was back in 1967 or 1948 or 1973, or maybe it's even ancient times. I say to them, is Israel, do they still have enemies surround them? Like, oh yes, yes, they do, yes. But in what way and how is that? How is this being fulfilled then? Because this is the entire, complete destruction of the pricking briars, as Ezekiel calls it, out of the picture. And just so that you definitely know that this is something that is going to be, that's futuristic, if you like, at the end of Psalm 83, what does it say in the last verse? What's the conclusion of all of this? That men may know that you, thou, whose name alone is Jehovah, it says in my authorized version, Yahweh, art the most high over all the earth. That would be the conclusion. Now, is that the case? Are we sat here with all men recognizing that God is the great God, Yahweh is the great God of all the earth? I don't think so. But is it happening now? It could be, couldn't it? It most certainly could be underway. What's Israel saying? We are going to destroy Hamas. Israel, you see why I like this? Well, I don't like it, but you see why I'm attracted to this? Because it says Israel hammers Hamas targets in Gaza. Jael got a hammer and hammered through the head into the ground. There's a hammering that is going on. Here it is, look, Judges 5. Her hand reached for the tent peg. Oh, this is a song, by the way. It's a nice song to sing, possibly. I don't know. Her hand reached for the tent peg. Her right hand for the workman's hammer. She struck Sisera. She crushed his head. She shattered and pierced his temple. At her feet he sank. He fell. There he lay. At her feet he sank. He fell. Where he sank, there he fell, dead. That's the song, straight out of Judges. It's a cataclysmic end. And what's Israel saying? This is it. We don't care what you're telling us to do. This is an existential threat to our country. We are going to destroy those who have long threatened our destruction. We are no longer sitting back. It's the end. Zechariah 12. Exactly the same situation. Verse 1, a prophecy, the word of the Lord concerning Israel. The Lord who stretches out the heavens, who lays the foundation of the earth, who forms the human spirit within a person, declares, I am going to make Jerusalem a cup that sends all the surrounding peoples. Notice this phrase, surrounding peoples, nearby people, it says in some versions, reeling. Judah will be besieged as well as Jerusalem. And a couple of verses later, in verse 6, it says, on that day, I will make the clans of Judah, that word clans is translated as governors in the AV. It means the leaders of Judah, like a fire pot in a wood pile, like a flaming torch among sheaves. What are the leaders of Jerusalem going to do? They will consume all the surrounding peoples right and left, but Jerusalem will remain intact and in her place. Interesting. The surrounding peoples are going to be destroyed by the rulers of Jerusalem with fire. That's what it says. Now you might think, is this actually all about Jerusalem? Really, is it? Because that says this is about Jerusalem. I'm going to make a cup, Jerusalem as a cup that sends all the surrounding peoples reeling. By the way, some modern versions say this is like an intoxicating drink that they've drunk. Only for the surrounding peoples. For everybody else, it's a burdensome stone if you read the next verse. But for the people who are nearby, it's like an intoxicating drink. I'm not going to ask you when you last got drunk, or if you've ever been drunk. I'm sure you never have in your whole lives. But imagine that you were. There's some things that happen when you've drunk too much alcohol. One is that you lose all morals. Morals collapse, don't they, when you're drunk? I'm talking not from experience. You understand what I'm saying. But your morals go down. There's extreme violence, isn't it? If you went into the city centres with people who've had too much to drink, there's brawling, there's fighting, there's sexual harassment and even rape. Horrendous things. Why? Because they're intoxicated. These nearby people, Jerusalem has sent them intoxicated. And to some extent, you know, when Hamas went in and did what they did, it was as if they were intoxicated. In fact, evidence is that many of them were super high on drugs. Now, here's the thing. Hamas, when it launched its operation on the 7th of October, and was planned for some time, I can tell you, called it Operation Al-Aqsa Flood. Now, why did they call it Al-Aqsa Flood? I mean, what does that mean? Why have they called it Operation Al-Aqsa Flood? And the answer to that is this. Al-Aqsa refers to that mosque that is on Temple Mount, right next to the temple, the Dome of the Rock, as we call it. But as the BBC, this is an image taken from the BBC, the whole site, in other words, the entirety of the Temple Mount area, which of course is where the original temple to God was, the whole site is considered as Al-Aqsa Mosque. To the Palestinians, the whole of that area is Al-Aqsa. And that is why they've called it the Al-Aqsa Flood. It's a flood. We're going to come and like a storm, and we're going to take it. What did God say? The surrounding peoples, they're going to go for Jerusalem. What's going to happen to them? They're going to be destroyed and burnt up left and right. Exactly what Psalm 83 says. I want to show you something now which is I think this is quite amazing, right? So basically, we've talked a lot about up here, but have you seen that this area has been on the news a lot? The Red Sea. And it's because there's the Houthis down here in Yemen, who are another proxy army of Iran, that are firing missiles on all the traffic that comes through here, of which there are thousands and thousands of ships coming through here and through the Suez Canal into the Med to save them going all around Africa. Now, the Houthis are on side with Iran and also hate Israel. In fact, they've actually fired some missiles up to hit Israel. An American warship here intercepted and took it out. Now, why is this interesting? What has Yemen got to do with anything? Well, let me just show you a couple of headlines to start with. Israel's war erupts at sea and threatens to drag in America. That was December the 12th, just a few weeks ago, in Newsweek. Maritime attacks being conducted hundreds of miles away by powerful Yemeni movements aligned with Iran mark a growing escalation with the potential to drag the US deeper into the conflict. Fighting in the Red Sea is intensifying as more international warships pile on, that's Daily Telegraph, December the 18th. On 15th of December, HMS Diamond, that's one of our ships, or the UK ships, I should say, announced her arrival in the Red Sea by shooting down a Houthi drone. In normal times, this would be remarkable, but we are not in normal times. Well, you can say that again. In normal times, look, this strait, the sea, the Red Sea, carries a sixth of world trade. And what suddenly happened is all the major shipping companies that go up the Red Sea calmly and nicely on a normal day have said, forget it. We can't get insurance. We're going round Africa now. And it's putting the costs up massively. It's a major, major problem. UK and allies issue final warning to the Houthis over Red Sea attacks. That's January the 3rd. The unprecedented warning follows weeks of attacks against commercial vessels crossing the Red Sea. And lo and behold, when it says 2 hours ago, that literally is 2 hours ago. Because if you were on the BBC, and some of you were nodding and saw it, US and UK navies repelled the largest Houthi attack on Red Sea shipping, and who knows what's going to come tomorrow? Because we've threatened that we will. When I say we, the UK and US have threatened that they will attack, and they've attacked. They're not giving up. What has this got to do with anything? Now, have a look at this. So Joel chapter 3 is the same story as Zechariah 12, at least these few verses are, and also Psalm 83. So here it is, look, verse 4 says, yea, what have you got? This is God talking, and I think in quite a sarcastic voice. Yea, what have you got to do with me, says God, O Tyre and Zidon? Oh, well, that's interesting. Tyre, I've heard of that somewhere before. Oh, wait a minute, that was Psalm 83, the inhabitants of Tyre. Zidon's next door, right? And all the coasts of Philistia, or it says Palestine in this version. Oh, well, that's interesting. The coasts of Philistia. Well, where's that? I wonder where the coasts of Palestine are. Answer, Gaza Strip, the Palestinians. Will you render me a recompense? If you recompense me swiftly and speedily, I will return your recompense on your own head. If you come against me, you're going to get it back double. Because you've taken my silver, my gold, you've carried into your temples my goodly pleasant things. The children of Judah and Jerusalem you've sold to the Grecians that you might remove them far off from their border. Behold, I will raise them out of the place where you've sold them and will return your recompense on your own head. In other words, you wanted to get rid of Israel. I'm going to get rid of you. But the multi-million-dollar question is where? Look what it says in verse 8. I will send your sons and your daughters, Tyre, Hezbollah, and Sidon, Hezbollah, and the coasts of Palestine, which is Hamas. I'm going to sell your sons and daughters into the hands of the children of Judah, and they will sell them to the Sabaeans, to a people far away. Now I look at Sabaeans, because I think, well, where are these people going to end up? Where are the Sabaeans? How many times is the word Sabaean mentioned in the whole of the Bible, do you think? Only once. And it's just here. You want to know where it is? Well, it didn't take you long to find out, because you can go on Wikipedia and type in Sabaeans. It's quite helpful. But there's other places that say this. They founded the kingdom of Saba in modern-day Yemen. Ah. So that's quite interesting then. So basically, God says, I'm going to send you far off, and he says you're going to end up in Yemen. The survivors of all this are going to end up in Yemen. Now, when you put it on the screen,
around it,
like this, look. Oh, there was another video. Let me just play you this video. I've got to play this. This is quite interesting because it sort of explains what's going on.
Around Israel, circling like sharks sniffing for blood, are Iran and their allied proxy forces that they call the Axis of Resistance, consisting of the king, Iran itself, Their Rook, the Houthis in control of northwestern Yemen. Their Knights, the Shiite militias in Iraq and Syria. Their Bishop, the Bashar al-Assad regime in Syria. Their Queen, Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. And their various pawns, the many Palestinian militant groups operating within the Gaza Strip, all of whom cooperate together with Iran in pursuit of a common ultimate objective: the complete annihilation of Israel as a state. Of all the pieces on the board that are in this axis of resistance, it is Iran's Rook, the Houthis, who are the ones that are the most geographically far removed from the current fight going on between Israel and Hamas. Their territory is about 1,600 kilometers away from Israel's, and separated by the entirety of Saudi Arabia and nearly the entire length.
Interesting, isn't it? Now, look, this is pretty mind-blowing to me, because there's this, how that author has put it together, calling Iran's whole game, if you like, of chess, like a chessboard like this. And I sort of think it is a bit like that. In Joel chapter 3, there is Tyre and Zidon, there are all the coasts of Philistia, and there are the Sabaeans. All of them within a couple of verses in Joel chapter 3. And God says, this little lot here are going to end up down here. They're going to be given a new home, basically. You are going to push Israel in the sea. You will be given a new home. Now, we wait to see, don't we? But isn't that pretty amazing? I think that's pretty amazing. Where does Syria fit into this? Syria is an arch enemy of Israel, as we know. Israeli strikes on Syria intensify and they raise tensions with Iran. That was back in April. New Iranian and Hezbollah bases south of Damascus. That was in June. IDF, Israeli Defense Force document, warns that the next major attack will come from Jordan and Syria. That was December, just a couple of weeks ago. Look, the Bible tells us that Syria is going to get involved with the initial inner ring war, and this will happen at that time. So in amongst what goes on with Hezbollah and Hamas, Syria at some point will be involved. And Isaiah 17 verse 1 will come to pass. Damascus will be removed from being a city and will become a fallen ruin. It never has. It's the oldest continually inhabited city on planet Earth, according to Wikipedia, and it's going to come to a cataclysmic end, the like of which might actually involve nuclear weapons. That's how bad it's going to get, right? It's as bad as that. Israel doesn't come out of this unscathed, by the way. When it really does kick off and the initial inner ring war really gets underway in a much wider sense, Israel is going to be wounded. It says in the same chapter in Isaiah 17 that the fortified towns of northern Israel will also be destroyed and the royal power of Damascus will end. In that day, Israel's glory will grow dim. Israel is not totally unscathed in this. And there's not like a complete invisible force that stops every missile coming in. But they are victorious, wounded and weakened to some extent, but victorious at this time. It is then, after this initial inner ring war is finished, and there is a time of security for Israel, because the pricking briars have been removed, a time when they get themselves back together, that the outer circle war, as I call it, comes in from these surrounding nations. And this, brothers and sisters, is Ezekiel 38. This is Russia, this is Turkey, this is Iran, this is Libya, this is Ethiopia, all converging into the great void that's left in the Middle East when Israel thinks they've won. But they haven't at this point. There's more to come, and it's this outer circle. Not one of the outer circle nations of Ezekiel 38 is surrounding Israel in terms of being close to Israel. Look, all of this has been all happened. All of these are an outer circle that come in to the void that has been left. Syria literally will be a great big gaping hole of a nation, because the kingdom will just cease to exist as it was. Now here's the amazing thing, because Isaiah 17 concludes, remember Isaiah 17 started with the destruction of Damascus, Israel being weakened. What does it say at the end of Isaiah 17? Listen, the armies of many nations roar like the roaring of the sea. hear the thunder of the mighty forces as they rush forward like thundering waves. Who is this great army that's coming in like thundering waves after Damascus has been destroyed? This is Ezekiel 38. This is the surrounding nations pouring into the void that is left. So this is how I see Ezekiel 38 and how the nations sort of line up there. There's the initial inner ring war. Great conflagration could be starting right now. Israel wins, wounded, but now lives in confidence because they've managed to remove the pricking briars. Now, this is quite amazing because here in Ezekiel 38, I think the initial inner ring war is mentioned because it says in verse 8, a long time from now, I'm thinking this is the outer circle of nations, Russia and Turkey and so on, will be called into action. In the distant future, you will swoop down on the land of Israel, which will be enjoying peace after recovering from war. Well, well, well. Israel's recovering from war when Russia comes in. Which war is Israel recovering from? The initial inner ring war. And it comes after a time when all the people have returned from many lands to the mountains of Israel. So we know it's post-1948. You and your allies are going to come in a vast and awesome army and roll in on them like a great storm. That is what is going to happen. This outer circle war comes after the initial inner ring war. Now, at the minute, Israel looks very much like that with all its walls and security. But we read in Ezekiel 38 that this is what the sovereign Lord says. On that day, thoughts will come into your mind. You will devise an evil scheme. And this is talking about the thoughts of Gog, the Russian ruler. Thoughts come into his mind. You will say, I will invade a land of unwalled villages. I will attack us peaceful and unsuspecting people. Do you think Israel is peaceful and unsuspecting right now? Do you think they will? Yes, because it says. When's that going to happen? It's got to happen after Israel's got security back. How do they get security back? Psalm 83, Isaiah 17, Zechariah 12, Joel 3. That's when this happens. That's when they're living without walls and without gates and bars. Putin, if he's the man in power, I think he could well be. He ticks all the boxes, doesn't he? If you're going to create a Gog, a Russian ruler, that's going to do something, this could be the man. It says in verse 10 of Ezekiel 38 that you will think an evil thought. You will say, I will go to the land of unwalled villages. And interestingly, it's to take a spoil and to take a prey. There's something that he wants in Israel. And here's what it might be. February the 16th, 2023, Israel exports crude oil for the first time with shipment heading for Europe. Have a watch of this.
But Israel's energy security problem finally started turning around in the late 2000s, when a series of big natural gas discoveries started suddenly being made in the eastern Mediterranean, right off of their own shoreline. In 2009 and 2010, a small American energy company based out of Houston called Noble discovered the massive Tamar and Leviathan gas fields within Israel's economic waters. Several smaller gas fields would be discovered in the years that have followed, to the point where it is now believed that Israel possesses nearly 1,100 cubic kilometers worth of natural gas reserves. Meaning that in only the span of a decade and a half, the country went from being completely insignificant in the global gas industry to having one of the top 25 largest reserves of gas in the world. Offshore drilling platforms were constructed, and by 2019, Israel was producing from both the Tamar and the Leviathan natural gas fields. And for the very first time, Israel was actually producing more natural gas than they were consuming. By the start of this decade in the 2020s, that fact enabled Israel to start doing two things that it had never been capable of doing before. First, it enabled the Israelis to become significantly more energy independent and less reliant on imports coming in from abroad. Israel's own natural gas supplies currently power more than 70% of the country's electricity, while Israel's domestically produced solar energy from solar farms across the southern Negev desert is expected to grow enough in the future to fully encompass the remaining 30% of Israel's electricity supply by the end of the decade in 2030. meaning that by that time, Israel will no longer have to rely on imports from anywhere to keep their electricity going. And second, Israel's production of natural gas rapidly beginning to exceed their own demands for it opened the door in the 2020s to Israel becoming a significant natural gas exporter as well. Israel already exports fairly substantial amounts of gas via pipelines to neighboring Egypt and Jordan, and there are further proposals in the works to construct a new €6 billion subsea pipeline from Israel to Cyprus to Greece to Italy that will open the door to Israel becoming a major natural gas supplier to the European Union as well. While expected liquefied natural gas processing facilities constructed around Israel's west coast will open up the possibility of Israel exporting its gas to anyone in the world who wants it. Israel's publicly stated ambitions are now to achieve a natural gas export capacity of 25 to 30 cubic kilometers per year by the end of the decade in 2030. An ambition that, if achieved, will skyrocket Israel from zero natural gas exports as recently as 2010 to one of the top 15 natural gas exporters in the
entire world. That's pretty amazing. Do you think Putin likes stuff like that? Do you think he likes gas and energy, especially when Europe's just cut him off? Is this a spoil that he might be interested in? I think so. So we've done all, oh yes, I'm just going to say this. So basically, when Russia comes down, he's with a whole bunch of other nations that are listed in Ezekiel 38, like Togarmah, Gomer, Persia, Libya, and Ethiopia. It says, you and your allies, a vast and awesome army, are going to roll into Israel. So let me just show you a couple of headlines in relation to this. So are we seeing Putin align himself to those nations, Iran, Turkey, and so on? Well, January last year, Putin holds second phone call in just over a week with the Iranian president. And later on in January in the Times, Russia and Iran connect banking systems to avoid Western sanctions. The Jewish press on February the 18th, Russia to send 24 advanced Su-35 fighter jets to Iran. The Times on March the 15th, Syria's Assad gets red carpet treatment on his visit to Moscow. Iran threatens Israel May the 11th during Russia summit amid Gaza rocket barrage. May 29th, Putin congratulates dear friend Erdogan as NATO's Turkey challenge looks set to stay. And of course, as we know, the Turkey's president, autocratic like Putin, has won another 5 years in power. BB, that's Benjamin Netanyahu, says Israel protested Russia's cooperation with Iran. Putin, in October the 13th, in the Daily Telegraph, compares Israel's actions to Nazi Germany. That's going down badly, as you can imagine, in Israel. The Russia-Iran axis is fomenting war in the Middle East. That was Daily Telegraph, October the 9th. Putin is forming an axis of terror as he welcomes Hamas and Iran to Moscow. So this is after Hamas has gone in. Putin welcomes Hamas and Iran to Moscow. I mean, it's incredible, really, but that's exactly what happened. If you look down here, look, it says, Putin has abandoned his long-standing alliance with Israel in favor of closer ties with Iran and its Islamist allies. Exactly what we would expect, but wouldn't we, with Bible in hand? Russia is turning increasingly hostile towards Israel as it picks sides in the Middle East. December the 8th, Russia's Putin meets Iran's Raisi in Moscow. So they're back again talking to Putin. Netanyahu demands that Moscow sever ties with Iran. Israeli PM Benjamin Netanyahu has demanded that Russia stop allying itself with Iran in a phone call with Russian dictator Vladimir Putin. You can imagine what Putin said back. Why are ties between Russia and Israel at lowest point since the fall of the Soviet Union? That was an article in The Guardian on December the 31st. And so, look, the scene is set. The scene is set, isn't it? For all these things to happen, and they could escalate very, 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 very quickly. Ukraine is still rumbling on. I've just got a couple of more slides to just show you here. Are you okay just for 2 minutes? 2? 1. Richard's got 1. No. So, at the time of the end, it says that the king of the south will push at him. I believe that the hymn that we're talking about here, if you go and have a look at Daniel 11, verses 36 to 39, the verses that come before, is actually Gog himself. So we've got at the time of the end, the king of the south, which is predominantly the US and UK, are pushing at Gog. That's what that's saying. And you notice then there's a colon, which is there in the original Hebrew, by the way, and it denotes a pause. So after the push of the king of the south against Gog, there's a pause, and after the pause, the king of the north comes against him like a whirlwind. That little colon is where the inner ring war sits. It's exactly in that little pause. So in other words, God says, as part of the story, the prophetical jigsaw puzzle, America and Britain are going to push, which means militarily provoke, the Russian leader, who currently is Putin, right? This is Daniel 11 verse 40 in pictures for you, because the word push is the Hebrew word to gore. It's like a horned animal. Now, a bull isn't going to kill you more than likely. It's going to just cause you a lot of pain and aggravation. There's Gog, there's Putin's head, look. This is the king of the south, militarily provoking this guy. That's exactly what Daniel 11:40 is telling you, and it says it happens at the time of the end. That is why, when I see headlines like this, that the UK, king of the south, will send tanks to Ukraine to push Russian troops back, it's Daniel 11 verse 40 language in front of you. 100%. Look here. It was Britain's intention to send tanks to help push back Russia's invasion. The push is taking place so that Ukrainian soldiers have got sufficient weapons and so on. The Ukrainian bit is part of the aggravation of Putin, the winding up of Putin, and he's got nothing left. He can't go west anymore. The only place he can head is south. And so this is why the Ukraine bit is so significant. Putin, his ally on the 1st of November, called for a ceasefire because Ukraine's reached a stalemate. And in the Times on November the 22nd, Russia opened to peace talks in tragic Ukraine war, says Putin. It's reached a stalemate. Nobody's moving forward. Nobody's moving back. Nobody can bring it to an end. Putin now says that we better talk. Let's just talk. And he's going to carve out a slice of Ukraine in the process. This is pretty much the last slide. This is the very last slide from last year. When I was here in January, this is the very last slide. And I put up 3 things that I said might happen in 2023. Right? So I'd forgotten I'd done this, but I went back and had a look at it. And these are the 3 things that I said we might see happen when I was here in January 2023, at the beginning of 2023. First of all, I put Putin may well force talks by massive provocation, nuclear. Out my mouth came also the word, he might even blow up a dam, which he actually did. But it all leads to some stalemate truce. It's exactly the point that we've reached is a stalemate, and there will be, still coming down the line, I think, some negotiated truce. One thing's for certain, Russia will not invade Israel while it's fighting a full-blown war in Ukraine. No nation really can fight 2 major wars at once. Ukraine will come to a stalemated truce. The next thing I said was, new hardline Israeli government may well try to make peace with Saudi Arabia. And then the last bit was, this in turn leads Iran to with deal off the table, to activate a war against Israel, the initial inner ring war. So I don't get quite well on that, because pretty much all of that is exactly what came down the track in 2023, isn't it? It's pretty much that. And if we were going to change what's that number to 24, I would just say it's more of the same. This will come to some stalemated truce. This is now off the table, like we said it would be. The inner ring war, do you think it's going to die away and disappear, or is it going to reach its conclusion? There's every possibility it will reach its conclusion. And all of this, brothers and sisters, is leading us to this day. And this is, I promise you, the last line, because this is it. All of this is heading to Jesus coming back. But the point is, in Zechariah 14, where these words come from, when he arrives in Jerusalem, all the saints are with him. When Russia is in Israel, all the saints are with Jesus when he arrives in Jerusalem, which must mean one thing, that we've been judged before then. Don't you think? If the saints are with Jesus, judgment has happened, and therefore the return of Jesus has happened before Russia has come into Jerusalem. That's one way of seeing it. In other words, the return of Jesus could be pretty much at any point from here on in, don't you think? As we're looking at things. So look, we need to keep watching, we need to keep awake. We're going to sing a hymn in just a second, which is hymn 191. But I've got the words coming up on the screen, because hymn 191 is talking about the people that were expecting the birth of Jesus. When you read it, we sing it at Christmassy time, or some people sing it at Christmas time, because it's talking about earth was waiting, spent and restless. And it's all about waiting for the birth of Jesus. So I've rewritten the hymn. I hope you don't mind. And we're going to sing the words I put up on the screen, because I've rewritten it as if it's us singing about Jesus coming back, and we're waiting for him to come back right now. Are you up for this? It's only 3 verses. My attempt at rewriting the hymn. So, end of story. Thank you so much for listening.